Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Mark Colgan. Mark is the Chief Revenue Officer at TaskDrive. TaskDrive is a company that helps SDRs and account executives spend less time on lead research and more time building relationships, booking meetings, and smashing revenue targets. We talk a lot more in the conversation with Mark in just a couple of minutes about specifically what TaskDrive does. The most important thing you need to know about having Mark here on the Startup Selling Show is that he can, as he likes to say, wax lyrical about prospecting and sales automation for hours. So if you are a startup and you are struggling with lead research, lead targeting, automating that process, you absolutely want to listen to this episode coming up in my conversation with Mark. In addition to the work that Mark does as the Chief Revenue Officer at TaskDrive, he is also the head of a company called Yellow O, which helps startups and tech companies build their marketing and sales stack. Two other really important notes that I think are not just important, but also very, very interesting. Mark also works with a family business where they converted a horse trailer into a mobile bar, and that's called the Drinks Box. We talk a bit about that. And by month to month, Mark lives and works remotely. Currently, he is just outside of Athens, Greece. He's heading back to the UK for a short time before heading back to Greece again, and talked a bit about his decision and how he goes back and forth from Greece to the UK and every other place around the world where he likes to live. So we spent a couple minutes talking about that. Most importantly, in my conversation with Mark, we talked through his process for lead research, for the work that he does for his clients at TaskDrive. And then we dove into specifically the important signals and information that's important to use and collect when you're going through doing your lead research. So we talked about signals like hiring, press releases, online articles, technology changes, job descriptions, new roles, financial events. All of those are potentially signals that you can use to layer into the lead research data that you'd be getting out of any of the lead research you might be doing with Upwork, virtual assistants, or even data that you're pulling from platforms like Zoom Info. So we talked quite a bit about the signals that are important for you and for your company and identifying those signals so that you know which are the more likely now prospects versus the later prospects. We dove deep into that specific topic, talking about how to use inbound and outbound together. And Mark shared with us a percentage framework of how to think about who of your target prospects are actively buying, which ones are open to buying, and which ones are simply not buying. Then we talked about the importance of how to message and how to target specifically those that are not buying, because it doesn't mean they're never buying. It just means they're not buying right now. So he and I dove deep into some specific strategies that you can use for people that reply back to your cold outreach that say, hey, not interested, ping me next year. Or, hey, we decided to go work with another vendor, and how you can use closed loss opportunities as a way to win back new business. From there, we then talked about a couple of the key lead research strategies and lead sourcing playbooks. So one of the reasons that I had Mark on the show is because I came across his blog post that he posted on LinkedIn recently called the 14 Lead Sourcing Playbooks for B2B Companies. And it's a blog post with a video. And in that video, Mark details 14 different lead sourcing playbooks and how to specifically find prospects who may have intent to buy soon. And so because of that post and because of his willingness to share his expertise, he and I connected, asked him if he'd be willing to come onto the show. And as a result of being on the show, we talked about a few of those key playbooks, a couple of lead sources that you might not be thinking of, some that are underused and some that might be overlooked that you could be using today to source leads for your B2B startup. So absolutely, you want to listen to this episode, especially if you're thinking about how to fill the top of the funnel with the right leads ready to take action right now, because Mark and I pretty much spent the last hour talking about that exact topic. So without any further ado, let's head over to my conversation with Mark Colgan. I read more about you in Getting Ready, and you are a mobile person.
Pretty mobile. Yeah.
So are you in Greece right now?
Yeah, in Athens, where we're going to be until Sunday, and then we're going Well, I would say back home, but we're going to Ireland for Christmas this year because my family are going to be over there. And then after Ireland, we'll be in the UK for January, and then back to Greece for a couple of months, and then wherever else after Brexit. We're waiting to find out what our travel situation is going to be as a non-EU citizen. So it's a little bit up in the air.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Well, I wanted to ask you about that because I was reading your background. So by month, you're living and working remotely. By weekend, you're working on the family business. And then by night, working with Yellow O, and by day, working with TaskDrive.
Yeah.
So that's quite a handful, all doing it remotely.
Yeah, I must say I support the drinks box, the bar, more from a sales and marketing point of view. So although most of the events are on the weekend, so my brother and my dad tend to do the events, but I do all of the sales for the events.
Well, let me ask you just maybe a more pointed question as we kick off. Mm-hmm. When people ask you, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
So I start with, what takes up most of my time, and that's TaskDrive, working as Chief Revenue Officer. For me, that's the priority. Heading up sales, marketing, customer success, and product is a busy enough role. And then I guess my second priority would be the Yellow O and the consulting I do there to, B2B startups, just to help them with the sales and marketing automation. So that's where mm-hmm. most of my effort is.
And so the drink box is the side business, the side family business.
Kind of, I've automated a lot of it. So we do a lot of email outreach, but all automatically. I've just got systems in place that churn over quite nicely. I have some researchers that find events agencies, wedding planners, people that could be potential partners, and they reach out, and then their call to action is to contact my dad. So I can kind of turn my laptop off and let that run automatically now that it's all set up. So you're eating your own dog food when it comes to automation on the sales side. Indeed.
Yeah, I shouldn't call it dog food. I mean, you're practicing what you preach is probably a better way to describe.
That would be better for the recording.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different ways I'd like to start here. I was thinking about starting, and the automation piece that you just described with the drinks box, I think is a really important way to think through what you do with TaskDrive. Mm-hmm. And also, I think also as it relates to Yellow O. And so, for the people that are listening that have never come across TaskDrive, maybe start there, because I do want to get into some of the fantastic content that you have pushed out there around lead sourcing playbooks and lead development and sales development work. So I would love to hear a little bit more about how you describe TaskDrive and what you're doing and how you're different from some of the other sales automation platforms out there. And then we can get into your zone of genius here when it comes to some of the playbooks.
Cool. Okay. That sounds good. So first of all, TaskDrive is effectively a productized service. So a lot of people think we're a software, but we're actually a team of individuals, completely remote and distributed across the world. We're effectively an outsourced lead and data enrichment company. Our mission is to give B2B sales and marketing teams superpowers. And we do that by taking over all the labor-intensive tasks and help companies find, net new leads for prospecting, or maybe enriching existing data, or helping them better understand their key accounts or their target accounts that they're going for. So basically, we leverage our researchers and our trained researchers, so sales and marketing teams can focus on the high-value tasks like building relationships and closing more deals and growing revenue. So I like to say that we don't simply build lists, but we take, a strategic research-based approach to find qualified leads, enrich your data, and help you understand accounts more. So I guess that's the elevator pitch.
And so how did you come to identify this specific gap in the market? Because when I was doing the research and thinking about it, even ourselves here with our company, with all of our clients, we use Upwork or mm-hmm. some of the other freelancer kind of platforms where you can say, hey, I need a list of prospects mm-hmm. from this website or from this conference, and you can get a pretty healthy spreadsheet. So you have that available to you from a human standpoint. And then from a technology standpoint, there's platforms like Zoom Info as an example, mm-hmm. or D&B, where you can get the data. So what is the gap that you have clearly identified, and how would you describe it for people that might say, I'm sure you get this all the time, like, oh, I've got that covered. I'm good. Sure. I got a way to get list.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And there's two scenarios there. So the person who's you maybe got a VA or somebody from Upwork, and they've asked them to follow a task to find and search a number of data points. What we often find there is a lot of people underestimate how much time it takes to not only find the person, but to bring them up to speed, train them, show them show them the ropes and how it works in your business. And then often they ghost you. They can just completely disappear, and then you're left completely high and dry without the data you need, and then you need to go through the research cycle again the recruitment cycle again to recruit somebody else. Another thing with that as well is that oftentimes you just have one VA. You don't have somebody doing the quality assurance. So unless you're going in there to check the data and verify it all, you're just taking the word of one person, which we'd always recommend that you have a second pair of eyes looking at any sort of data, especially if you're going to then put that data into your sales enablement platforms. From the other side of things, we actually have a lot of customers who use ZoomInfo, or they use LeadIQ, Seamless, whatever the tool is. However, it still takes time for their SDRs and for some of their sales reps to actually do the research themselves. And there's also two other issues with databases like this. They're not always as up to date as they say they are. So you often find that the data that you get out of there isn't up to date, and LinkedIn tends to be a more up to date source of data. And also, you can't pull specific information that's really important to the conversations you need to have with your prospects. So take an example, or a few examples from some of our customers. One of our customers is really interested in webinars, and they want to find out of their target accounts, what webinar platforms are they using? How often are they producing webinars? Is there a form in front of the webinar, or is it completely free to attend? And is it paid or is it free? Now, there's no database built to tell you that. And they have their SDRs going through and do that research. But now working with TaskDrive, we take over all of that heavy lifting for them, so that their SDRs are given the data that they would have looked up anyway. And for another company as well, we look at the case studies of the target companies that we're researching, and we give them the link to the case study, so they can click one link, make a phone call, and also reference the case study almost in real time with the data that we've researched for them. So the answer is you can do it yourself, but is that the best use of your SDR's time or your salespeople's time, or is it better to outsource it and have it achieve it at scale?
Yeah, I love the way that you describe that. The word that popped into my mind as you were describing is context for the data. You can get a bunch of data and a bunch of information, but if you don't have the right context around why that information is important for your company or for your SDR, for that lead, then you still have a lot of work to do. It's just a foundation. Yeah, if you still got to do a lot of work around that data in order to make it useful, then you're wasting a lot of time.
Yeah, and you're not even thinking about signals, or you're not even thinking about the triggers that would mean that this conversation would be of benefit to that individual. Just because, and I think we'll talk about these a little bit later, but just because somebody has the same job title that fits your buyer persona, it doesn't mean that they're ready to buy from you or even interested in buying. So it's something that we also speak to a lot of our customers and prospects about as well.
Yeah, the signaling piece is something that I know, just working with our clients in the startup world, they struggle with that because, like you said, you're like, okay, here's a list of 1,000 CTOs or 1,000 directors of marketing. That's our target customer or target prospect. And so the tendency with the automation platforms is, okay, it's really easy, batch sequence, blast it out.
Yeah.
Then you send 1,000 of those and you get 5 replies, and 4 of them are taken off your list.
Yeah.
Because there's no context around the signal. So what is it what do you do that specifically helps an SDR, for example, if you give them a list of 100 leads or 100 contacts, what are some examples of signals that people should be looking for in order to know if it's the right time to even bother connecting with that director of marketing or that CTO?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And it does depend on the product that you're selling, the market that you're selling into as well, and the value that you offer. Now, if I just look generically or at the market overall, you could look at things like, are they currently hiring? Because if they're hiring within their team, it might be a good time for you to start a conversation. Or have there been any financial events at the companies? Have they raised a round of funding? Have they released earnings reports? Has there been a merger and acquisition? You could also look at press releases, if that's something that's relevant to your audience. Have they won any awards? Could that be a good time to speak? I personally like the currently hiring, because it shows that they are either investing in their team And even if they're just replacing and they've actually got a recruitment freeze, but they're still replacing somebody, it still shows that they need something to help them achieve their goals quicker. And when I look at how I can position TaskDrive and how it can increase their reps' productivity, for me, that's a perfect time to speak to somebody. They're already investing in their team. How do they maximize the return on that? You could also start to look at, online articles as well within from the company, from the account base, and technology too. So if your tool or if your service supports a larger technology ecosystem, then look for people who have just started using Marketo, for example. And that could be, again, a good time to start the conversation if you have a complementary product or service to Marketo in that example.
I was thinking about like Salesforce. If I see that somebody has just converted over to Salesforce, or some kind of press release around that, and I've got a product that sits on that platform, then Definitely. It's easier for me to sell that. Because they're already using it. It's already part of that ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. And so what about press releases? Are there any like specifically, you said press releases and financial events. Why do you consider those to be signals?
Yeah, so oftentimes a large financial event signifies a time of change and usually a time of growth. So again, when you're looking at rounds of funding that have been raised, now they've actually got access to capital that they need to spend on their on the next stage of their journey. And again, if your product or service can support that, then it's a good time to speak to somebody. Now, I unfortunately, I see a lot of people sending emails saying, "Hi, I saw that you raised your Series A. Come and buy from us now. Our shop's open." Oftentimes, the budget has already been allocated elsewhere or already pre-spent. But still, if you are there to show up as a trusted advisor and be there and provide value, that's the whole aim of the game. What a lot of the times when, again, we don't do any outbound emails on behalf of our clients, but we do a lot for ourselves. I never pitch and I never sell in those emails. The point of the emails is just to start the conversation, to see if they have a problem that I have the solution for. If they don't have the problem I have the solution for, it's not the end of the conversation. It's just that they don't have that problem right now. And I will do my best to nurture them and show up as a trusted advisor and genuinely want to give good content that helps them. So that could be raised, that could be funding as well.
I was imagining how like being so blatant about like, hey, I saw that you raised a Series A, therefore you must have money. Wouldn't you like to spend some of that with me?
Yeah.
So you don't even have to allude to the event itself, just knowing that the event happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And
what's important.
Because it's so prolific now, I actually use it in my LinkedIn connections and I just do it as a laugh. I say, hey, I noticed you raised a round of funding. I've got a course about taking it from C to Series A. Do you want to buy my course? And then I'm saying, of course, I'm joking, just hoping to connect with you. And the amount of people, it stands out in the inbox. It's slightly different to what you usually receive, and it's a pattern interrupt to the normal pitch. So yeah, I think you can use some of these triggers as a good opportunity to start the conversation, but have some fun with it.
Yeah, I like that approach where it's almost like you put yourself on their side immediately by showing empathy because they're probably getting bombarded.
Exactly.
With 17 other emails about everything from, hey, you might need a mobile app developer overseas now, to a fractional CFO, to a marketing platform.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that.
All right, folks, we are off and running in my conversation with Mark Colgan. Listen, thank you for listening to the Startup Selling Show. I really, really appreciate that you're listening. And one of the reasons that we do this podcast is because the mission of our company here at Sales Koala is to help 100 startups reach $10 million in annual recurring revenue over the next 10 years. For us, that means we could make $1 billion impact in the global startup community. And so the podcast and delivering content like this is just one of the ways that we feel like we can make an impact in the lives, in the companies that are listening to the show and the companies that are out there trying to grow from idea to impact. One of the other ways that we feel like we can make that impact for companies just like you is through a book that I just published called Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Ramp up your B2B startup repeatable revenue with the Q framework. So if you are digging this content that you're listening to right now in my conversation with Mark and thinking about how can I put some of this tactical framework to action, how do I put it into motion for my company and my startup, then you absolutely want to get a copy of this book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, because in that book, I detail what's called the Q framework, where you can use much of these techniques and much of the tactics that we're sharing in this exact episode to work in your company, in your startup, to help you ramp up and scale up your company and your revenue. The best way to get a copy of this book is to head over to my website, Qualia, Qualia.com. And right at the homepage, you'll see a link that says Start Reading Now. Click that link. You can download an entire PDF electronic copy of the entire book. I think that's a little bit redundant, but you get the point. So listen, grab a copy of the book. You're absolutely going to love the book. The reviews are great on Amazon. I'm really, really proud of this book. I'm really, really proud of the response that we've been getting. I've been hearing from people that are sending me text messages, getting emails from people that I've never met before that have picked up a copy of the book, told me that they're reading it and putting this framework to action in their startup every single day. So grab a copy of the book, tell a friend or 10, and help us get this book out to as many startup entrepreneurs as we can. Okay, that's it for now. Let's head back to my conversation with Mark Colgan.
So I appreciate that backdrop, because I know that's something that, like, obviously you're got your team that's doing a lot of this lead research for your clients and your customers. And like the crux of what I wanted to dive into really started from me reading about your 14 lead sourcing playbooks for B2B companies. So, like, by the way, for everybody listening, if you don't listen to another minute of this podcast, just go over to TaskDrive and check this out, because this video you put together is one of the most detailed videos I've seen for somebody that's just showing, like, you're showing people specifically how to do this, like step by step. It's not just, hey, you should go to a conference website and collect leads. It was like, this is exactly what you should do with that. And so you've identified 14 of these. I mentioned conferences being one. How did you come up with 14 of these different lead sourcing playbooks? Because I think a lot of times we get stuck on 2 or 3, like, oh, conferences and LinkedIn, and I'm going to buy a list, and those are my 3 lead sources.
So I think there's two reasons, or 2 ways really. One, I generally love this stuff. I'm so passionate about lead sourcing, research, marketing, sales. And the second reason really is at heart, I'm a marketer. So I have a mixed background of experience. I've worked in sales and marketing, all in B2B. And whenever I've worked in a marketing capacity, I've always asked myself, who is the customer? Where do they spend time, and what do they care about? And then how do I create content that they care about, share it with them in a place that they spend time? And because I know who they are, I can directly kind of outreach to them and do a lot of outbound marketing. So I've always believed that inbound and outbound lives alongside each other. So for years, when I've been doing marketing or been working in the marketing capacity, I've always been looking for, where can I get this content, this good content, in front of the right people? So I sat down one day, and actually I had this idea. I didn't know how many numbers I had or how many I'd put together, but I knew I had 10. And I just put a message out on LinkedIn and said, I thought of 10 lead sourcing strategies. If anybody's interested, hit that, say so in the comments, and I'll film it in the next 24 hours. And because it had been on my mind, I've been wanting to do it, but other things had got in the way. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to put that out there, commit, and ended up overnight putting together some of the slides. And I'd been preparing for a presentation anyway, so I'd had some of the templates ready. But I ended up coming up with 14, and some are quite close to some are quite close to each other. But I think they all have their unique use cases. My challenge now is to think of 6 more to get to 20. I've got 2, but I'm not ready to share them yet.
Okay. Well, I like the public accountability of this as a forcing function. You just, as soon as you put it out there, I've talked before about different levels of accountability. There's personal accountability where you promise yourself, I'm going to do this. And then there's sort of team accountability, or having like a coach, somebody like me. It's like, okay, I promise you I'm going to do these things. But when you have peer and public accountability, that's the strongest kind, because now you know people are watching you.
Absolutely.
So probably not going to have time to go through all 14. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, of the 14, what is maybe 1 or 2 of those that are probably the most unusual, or ones that are most overlooked by, think about like a SaaS software company, software startup, selling enterprise B2B. What are 1 or 2 that are most frequently overlooked or most unusual?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I want to caveat all of this with it starts with knowing who your ideal customer profiles are, and the buyer personas and what they value and what their challenges are, because that helps you create the content, which then helps you start the conversation. And I guess one more thing I want to caveat this with is that only 3% of your market is actively buying, 7% is open to buying, and the remaining 90% aren't actively buying. So don't pitch to everybody. I think the goal here is to start a conversation, show up, increase the awareness of your brand, and play the long game. And I think so many of us in sales as well, I've got quotas that I'm trying to hit as well. And my quota ends at the end of the quarter, but I've got to play the long game. It takes so much discipline to do so, but by playing the long game, the effort and input you put in just compounds in the future. So I would say hold your nerve and continue giving value, because making money is just a side effect of delivering value. And that's what I found throughout my whole career to date. So yeah.
So I want to dig into that a little bit more, because those are really interesting statistics. So 3% actively buying, 7% are open to buying, 9% are not buying.
Yeah.
This is consistent with some other data I've heard. I'm curious about how did you come to those? Is that from a particular source or a report or a study?
Yeah, it's actually from Chet Holmes's Ultimate Sales Machine. I always have to double check. Yeah, which is quite an old book now, I think, 2007. And it talks really about demand gen. And, it's an old stat, but I believe it still holds true. We were discussing at the beginning, I live and work remotely. So there are certain things that I don't need to buy right now, like a car, or certain things that you'd have in here, like furniture. But there will be a day where I actually will decide to settle down back in London, and I need to buy furniture. I need to buy a bed, some kitchen stuff, a car. So I will be in the market then. And when I've been advising the consulting clients that I have and looking at all of our customers across TaskDrive, I can still see in their markets that they're trying to sell to that still the majority aren't actively buying, or they're not aware of the problem that they really have. And it's the job of the marketing function and the sales team to educate them on that problem and show them where the solution is.
And where do you start in terms of this 100%? So what's the sample size? What's the definition of the sample size? Meaning it can't just be like every CTO. If I'm selling to CTOs in, I don't know, the hospital healthcare segment, I could get a list of thousands, tens of thousands of CTOs across hospitals and healthcare in the United States.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that 3% of all CTOs that are leading hospital and healthcare systems are actively buying your product. So how do you start with that population sample to winnow down to the 3% of those that are actually likely or would be buying?
So I'd be looking at those hospitals that have received funding or extending or are spending, because those are and again, I'm not too familiar with the US healthcare market.
Yeah.
So my terminology
Nobody is, don't worry.
A little bit.
Everybody's confused.
But yeah, I'd be looking for signals. Again, looking for, is there somebody that's just started a new role? Is there a new CTO that's just joined a new healthcare trust or a new hospital? Because that's the time to speak to somebody. Most of the times when people start a new role, they have their own personal mandate to go and make an impression of how much value they can bring in to reduce the hirer's remorse, which is what I used to call it in recruitment. So it's like, is this person the right person for us? So by speaking to somebody when they've just started a new role, again, is a really good time. I'd look to see if they were hiring as well, if they were actively looking to recruit people to help support some of that technology that you might be installing. And one of the projects we've done for some of our customers is we go through job descriptions and look for particular keywords. We look for particular software or particular programming languages that they might be interested in. Yeah, there's an element of that we can automate, but we always double check it with a human pair of eyes. That's another way that you could approach this. So then you go, okay, these hospitals or these trusts are actively investing in their growth. Now might be a good time.
That really opened up an important insight for me, because when you think about the work that you're doing at TaskDrive, and whether it's one of your clients or any company that's looking to do outbound or doing lead research, it's not just about how do I get 1,000 CTOs on a list and then batch and blast them. They've had to be 1,000 of the right targets.
Yeah.
And those targets need to be based on signals that I've tested for my market. And like you've mentioned, hiring in your particular market obviously makes sense, because if they're hiring a sales development rep or ramping up their sales team, you know they're investing in sales. It might not be hiring for a CTO in the healthcare system, but if I'm selling to CTOs in the healthcare system, as a seller, I have to know what are those signals. And based on those signals, then I can say, if there's 100,000 CTOs in the hospital healthcare system in the US, maybe only 10,000 of them meet the criteria of the signals that I've identified and tested.
Mm-hmm.
So then I would go from 100,000 down to 10, and then of those 10, only 3% of those 10 are potentially actively buying. So it's not 3% of 100,000, it's 3% of the 10,000 that meet the criteria that I've set. So I think that's a really important distinction there.
Yeah, and you know, it could be 4%, it could be 5%, but the idea is only a very small amount are actively buying. And it's just really important to remember that when you're trying to, as a prospect or as an SDR, you're trying to establish whether they are in an active buying state. So first of all, ask the question. You know, that is, ask if this is a problem that they actually have at the moment. Because if it's a no, that's fine. So again, to use an example of TaskDrive, I reach out to hiring managers when they're recruiting for SDRs, but I offer content about here are the personality traits and interview questions to ask SDRs when you're hiring them. I know you're hiring. Here's a bit of advice. You know, it could be your 5th, your 6th hire. It could be your 50th. However, here's a bit of value. I never force that. It's always like, if you'd like to take a look, please let me know and I'll send it across to you, because I'm not going to assume you want to read the content that, you know, my marketing team put together. Then I follow up a month later, and it's just like, hopefully the hiring went well. By this time, there would be, you may be onboarding them. Here's some content about how to successfully onboard an SDR into your team. And then I follow up a month. Okay, the numbers are off a little bit, but maybe a few weeks after that. And again, so you've recruited, you've asked the right questions, you've onboarded in the right way. Now's time to really ramp them up and also look at the productivity of your team. And if that is something that you're looking to focus on, TaskDrive can help you. We've helped XYZ with XYZ. If you'd like to find out more, I'm here to help. And if they don't, I'm again going to put them into a prospect nurture where I'm still going to turn up and provide value, because I know one day when they do need the help, they'll hopefully remember all of the helpful content that I've sent across to them. So again, it's a long game, but it works.
And there's a couple of things in there that I thought are interesting as you were describing it. One is, you know your market really well, to know those timelines. Mm-hmm. You know that, okay, if I'm hiring, it's going to take a month to hire and a month to onboard. And then at that point, I'm going to look for productivity and efficiency gains. And secondly, I might be hiring one SDR or two SDRs, and those first couple are purely experimental. Like in our world, like if you've never hired an SDR before, you're like, okay, I think we need an SDR. I think I know what I need them to do. I'm going to sit them down and let them do a lot of processes manually. Mm-hmm. And once we know how to do them manually, then we can look to automate them down the road. So even though I've hired today, I might not need TaskDrive today, but when I go from 2 SDRs to 10, mm-hmm. I'm looking for scale. I'm looking for speed, and efficiency, and that's where it could come in. So it's clear to me that, like, the lesson for somebody listening is, like, knowing the signal is first piece, and then the second piece is playing that signal out through a story line, mm-hmm. being empathetic along this distribution curve of 3% actively buying, 7% open to buying, the other 90, which is not right now. Mm-hmm. So knowing that, I think, is knowing that timeline, as opposed to like, are you ready to buy today? No? Okay. Take you off. I'm just going to assume you're never going to buy. Exactly. Because that's not the case.
Yeah. And I think this is even more powerful when you have calls with prospects. You have a first meeting with them. It goes well. They understand what it is, but now is not the right time, or whatever objection they give you. Take note of the objection. And if you're following up, find out if you're then closing them off as closed loss, mark down the reason why you closed lost. It could be that they lost out to a competitor. Could be that they're just going to do it themselves. If they're just going to do it themselves, I know they still need help with their outbound prospecting. So I'm going to still provide help to them, because they're going to remember the guy with the weird British accent when it comes to the fact that they need help with their prospecting, because I'm going to have my face on video and I'm going to show up in their social, and I'm just going to be everywhere for when they do have the need. Another thing as well, I started my sales career actually in recruitment. And that was a lot of like picking up the phone and money will come out of it. It was very much an SDR role with the human element of interviewing candidates and meeting hiring managers. And one of the most successful tactics I ever had I had a temporary desk. So I used to have people who were available to start like the next day or the next Monday. So I worked very closely with my peer who worked on the permanent placements. And whenever he lost he lost out to a competitor, we always wrote down we tried to find out the name of the candidate, couldn't always do it. We tried to find out where that candidate was coming from, because that's a backfill. The person's he's leaving a job or she's leaving a job to start a new one. And also that candidate might be rubbish. And the candidate might have pulled the wool over the hiring manager's eyes and the recruiter's eyes. And then after the day of that person starting that new role, I would call and I'd be like, I know that Scott was starting today. How is everything? Did he turn up? And I don't want to say like 1 out of 10 times that worked, but it worked. And there were times that I would also call at the end of the month and like, how are things working out with Scott? And they're like, oh no, well, he's a lovely guy, but not quite a fit for us. I've got 2 immediately available candidates who can start on Monday. I'll send over their CVs. Let me know which one you want to start. And I've always taken, and that was years and years ago in my career, and I've always remembered that strategy. And I try and think, where can I deploy a similar strategy or a similar approach to anything that I do?
I love the fact that you're looking at the closed loss as an opportunity. We had a client that took this exact same approach, and they lost a very large deal. It was like a $200,000 deal. And frankly, they were down to the final 2. They were completely heartbroken. They lost it. And I said, look, just stay in touch. You never know what's going to happen. And he took the same approach you took, very similar, staying in touch. How's it going? Got this new thing that's happening with our product. 90 days later, the other implementation was not going the way it was supposed to go. And guess who got the call? Because he stayed in front. He wasn't this remorseful, oh, that sucks, I'm just going to move on. Those guys are gone. And like you said, it's not all the time.
No.
But to build that arsenal of, it's another channel for potential leads. And you never know, right? What if the director that you're working with moves companies? Maybe it was a committee decision. 4 of the 5 wanted this one platform. The 5th one wanted yours. So the 5th person lost, but then they moved companies. Mm-hmm. And now they're in the new company. And guess what? Hey, I really wanted to use your platform at the other company, but I couldn't. I got outvoted. Guess what? Because you stayed in touch, I'd love to see how we can get you in here.
Exactly. And I think a couple of other points there as well is that, as you say, when they start a new role, you don't, as much as you want to know the context that you're speaking to, you don't always know their movement. So it is really important to stay in touch, but you can automate a lot of this. You can set that close loss condition, triggers an automation, which then drip feeds out a number of emails. And because you've put in, and I know it's very hard as salespeople to always put in the close loss reasons as much as it is the lead source. I've been a marketer on the other side. But if you put in the close loss reason, you could then build out tailored messaging, which applies to most people. And the other thing here as well is that it pays for you to know how your competitors stack up. Because if you know that your competitor's SaaS product has a particularly tricky onboarding process, or the implementation can be quite long-winded, use that to your advantage and make sure you stay closer to those closed loss deals that are lost out to competitor X or competitor Y. So it's not about using competitor intelligence just for objection handling. It's also about using it for like closed loss opportunities. And if, end of Q4, you're looking to try and get some last minute deals across the line, I'd go back to my closed loss and see who isn't happy and see if I can have some conversations there.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and the last piece I wanted to mention about the 3-7-90 numbers of 3% actively buying, 7% open to buying, 90% not buying. That just gives me some comfort that it's not me. If people, it could be me if I'm sending bad messages or spamming people, if I'm getting lots of rejection. It's not typically, as long as I'm doing those things correctly.
Yeah.
Getting a lot of rejection is just part of it. It's not really rejection. It's more like not interested doesn't mean never. It just means not right now. Yeah. And so it just helps me stay sane when I know that, okay, I've got this, I'm targeting 1,000 CTOs at healthcare systems. Mm-hmm. Like if I've done a good job of targeting and knowing my signals and being clear about my target market, 3% of 1,000 is 30.
Yeah.
Like only 30 of these people are actively buying, and only another 70 of those 1,000 are even open to buying. And even if they are open to buying, it could be a 6 to 12 month process before we even really get things cracked open.
Yeah.
So getting one, not right now, or not interested, or, we get that all the time. How do I turn a well, ping me in Q2. You get that with clients. Like, what do I do? I'm like, you don't do anything. Like you keep them on your list. You ask them, hey, we're going to publish a white paper in January. Can I send it to you when it's published?
Yeah.
You were just saying, stay in touch with them and just log that. You're banking that for down the road. Like I kind of look at it as like, okay, I got a response and now I've got a lead banked for Q2 of next year. That's one less lead I need to find in May of Q2.
Yeah. I have heard some, I don't want to say controversial advice, but I really liked the way he delivered it. I can't remember his name right now, but if I can remember, I'll send it across to you. But he says, if they say, follow up with me in Q2, that's great. And what most salespeople will do if they hear that is think, okay, I'll send you a message just before the end of Q1. So, I'm going to get there just before Q2. And the guy was advocating that. He was like, never leave them alone. Keep calling them. But I feel like he went a little bit across the line. But just because they say end of Q2, that's 3 months, a lot can change. Stay close to them. As you say, share some content, ask questions. If you're producing events or your marketing team are putting on webinars, ask them what they want the webinar to be about. Everybody loves giving advice. And when you position the question as, hey, your advice can help us create some content and help some of your peers learn some of the things that or is this a burning question that you're trying to answer, and so will the other peers be? Most people in the world are nice and most people want to help people. So if you position your asks in the right way, you'll have this buy-in and engagement time and time again, and you'll find that they call you before the end of Q1 to set up that call in Q2.
Yeah, you've got this luxury of time. If they're telling you ping me in Q2, part of it is just how do you approach the mindset of that? Do you look at that and go, oh, I got rejected, they're not interested? Or do you say, great, now I've got 3 months of time available to me that they've given me permission to build a relationship with them. And if you just use that instead of, and it doesn't have to be, hey, are you ready to buy? It could be, we're running a webinar, what are some topics? Or, hey, we're going to be at this conference. Are you going to be in Dallas? Hey, we're about to publish this white paper. Would you like to write a guest blog post for us? Would you like to join us on a podcast? It could be any one of those things that builds a relationship so that, like you said, down the road, it's a much more natural flow to entering into that sales conversation as opposed to, hey, back in November, you told me to ping you in Q2. It's March 31st. When can we book a time next week? Like, who are you?
Exactly.
Cool. Thanks for diving into that. Probably unintended to go that deep into that 3-7-90, and I think is really useful for context and for framework for people, especially as they're building out their campaigns. So let's talk about lead research, because the reason we got into this part of the conversation, I was asking you, like, hey, what are one or two, unknown, like unusual or overlooked lead sources? And we got into this conversation because you're mentioning some of the caveats and knowing your signals and knowing your market. So assuming we've done all those things now, assuming we know our signals, we know our market, we understand this 3-7-90 rule, what are, if you could just think just generally, what are some of the more unusual ones, even if it's industry specific, that you and your team have uncovered?
Yeah, I'll try and give examples. And as you mentioned before, there's 14 of these. So maybe we could share a link to all 14.
Absolutely. Yep.
So but some of the more unusual ones that I love is the in-market. So this is where, you put your marketing hat on and you think, where are they hanging out? Where are they spending time online? Where are they putting their hand up to say that they're interested in something? So to use an example in the sales world, we've got the likes of Sam Nelson at Outreach, Beck Holland at Chorus. They're all producing really good content, really, really valuable content. And there's a lot of people interacting with their posts. So that these people are interested in potentially what Beck Holland is saying or what Sam is saying. And in these two examples, they're both around the SDRs. There's a gentleman in the SaaS world called Patrick Campbell, and he talks about pricing a lot. And if you had, a pricing product, or you had a product that helped reduce churn, pretty much everybody that's putting their hand up to try and get access to Patrick's awesome data might be interested in your product or might have the challenge that your product solves. So it's never to lead with, hey, here's my product. You said this, so here's my product. It's never as linear as that. It's like, hey, I noticed you talking about this. We've also created some content which complemented what Patrick had to say. Or actually, we've got some content that went against what Patrick had to say. It's okay to have an opposing opinion. And if anything, that would stand out more than saying like, oh yeah, we agree, and we wrote a little bit of a longer post. That's not as not as attractive as a give. So another place that you could find this as well is if you look at the likes of Product Hunt. So I believe I use the example in the video where I helped one of my friends who's a B2B email copywriter, so cold email copywriter. We went and looked at everybody who upvoted Mailshake, Lemlist, Salesloft. I don't think Salesloft launched, but all of the products on Product Hunt that were cold email platforms or email automation platforms. And we found everybody who upvoted them, because if they're upvoting a cold email platform, they might be sending emails. And if they're sending emails, they may not be the most talented email copywriter. And then if you could start the conversation and share some content, share some of your template. Everybody loves templates, even though you really shouldn't use someone else's template. Just because it worked for them doesn't mean it will work for you. But take the essence of the template, take maybe the framework. But again, coming from that place of giving value, offering templates, talking about it. I believe he offered some free consultations as well. He's like, send me your cold emails and I'll rip them to pieces. It's the best way that he could position himself as an expert. And then he gave some advice back. I think he recorded some Loom videos. And through that, he generated, I believe it was 7 or 8 new customers. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. But again, we didn't go through all of the lists. We only went through the most recent people who had upvoted because Mailshake was released 2 years ago. And the people that upvoted it 2 years ago when it first came out, the first 500 will be friends of Mailshake and the business and the people that work there. So we went more with the more recent and had a look to see, did their profile then fit his ideal customer profile? So it wasn't everybody that upvoted. It was people that had upvoted and also fit his customer profile. So that's an example.
I love this idea because you're piggybacking on somebody else's marketing work. So I know Patrick, he's been on the show. He's come and talked to our group at one of our clients' events. Super smart dude, super good dude, very giving. Mm-hmm. They have a huge following for their niche. And if they've done that work to collect people, get them onto a live or get them listening to a podcast or get them downloading whatever piece of content they're getting to download, if you can offer something complimentary, by all means, do it. Even straight up competitors, you could do that too, right? Like you're saying, if you had a platform that competed against Mailshake or Salesloft or Outreach, then you could do the same thing with them, because for the same purposes that we talked about earlier, somebody may have adopted and started using Outreach or Salesloft and just decided it's a good product. It's not a good product for us.
Exactly.
And so they're looking to make a change, and it has nothing to do with the other product not working correctly. It just, at the time of the purchase, it appeared that this could be the solution for our company. Once we got into it, either it was, too complex or had more bells and whistles than we needed. We needed a simpler platform. Maybe we need a more complex platform, whatever that is. So going back to those people that may have liked Outreach months ago, doesn't mean they're still using it.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one which I think I believe is underutilized just because of the mystery that surrounds it is the intent playbook, the one where you take intent data. Intent data isn't accessible to everybody.
Can you describe, just for definitions, what you mean by intent data?
Yeah, so intent data being third-party data collected from around the web of people expressing either an interest in your brand on your website or other topics and categories that relate to you. So in the playbook example, I use the company called LeadSift. They're an intent data provider. And what they do is they match a number of your competitors as well as some keywords that are specific to your industry and what people would be searching for you. And then they present that data to you. So you can see all of these individuals that have been connecting with your competitors, or your competitors have been connecting with them. They've been searching for content. They've been interacting with content. They may have been attending an event because they can track some of the events as well. Or they may be engaging with a hashtag. And I went through and spoke with Toucan at LeadSift, and we kind of segmented the prioritization of that data. And the people who are engaging with your competitors are people that you really want to be having a conversation with. Because if they are following, if an individual is following a competitor account, then you want to have that conversation with them because they are starting to follow them with an interest. I know it doesn't take much physically to follow somebody, but it takes a lot, not emotionally, but to actually follow somebody on LinkedIn or follow someone on Twitter, there has to be a motivation and a reason behind it. So that's a good time to, again, start the conversation. And I think people listening will be so fed up with me saying start the conversation, but I want to drum home that that's all that you want to be doing. And again, with the intent data, one of the downsides to intent data can be that there's a lot of it. So there's a lot that you need to sift through in order to, and that's why we did some work on prioritizing that data. And again, some of our customers use the intent data. They use our researchers to filter them out. And then we do that research and heavy lifting for them and then just pass on the most qualified of qualified leads to the customers, as well as the additional data points that the SDRs would need.
I imagine there's an 80-20 rule applies to that intent data.
Yeah.
It's like the top 3 or 4 signals or indicators or intent probably tells most of the story.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and what you just described is exactly why, you would want to have the right data in front of you, because if your job of your SDR is to create conversations, start conversations, whether that's, following somebody on LinkedIn, sending them a connection request, liking a post, sending out a quick email. The only way that somebody could do that with any real volume and effectiveness is to have the right data in front of them. If they don't have the right data and they're spending 15 minutes before they do of doing all of that research before they can even send that connection request to even know who I should be connecting with, then that's a huge waste of time and ultimately money that you're paying that SDR. Whereas if I had that list in front of me, okay, these are my 50 today, but already all that work is done for me, then it speeds the whole process up. And it also allows me to be a lot more effective because I'm going to be connecting with the right people, not the wrong people.
Yeah, and if you know that prospect had engaged with a particular piece of content or a piece of news, you could reach out to her and, by coincidence, be talking about the same thing or a similar thing. It's a very fine line between personalization and creepy, so you have to be careful with that. But and also different markets have different maturities. You could be quite cheeky with this sort of data with a marketing audience because they're a lot more savvy and mature when it comes to the technology that's available. Would it be the same to HR directors? Probably not, because they're not exposed to as many of these kind of marketing strategies and tactics as what marketing and salespeople are. So I'd be careful with your use of creepiness and personalization there.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Indeed.
All right. So so we talked about where to go, we talked about intent data. What would be one more place, and maybe it's not even an unusual or an overlooked one, but it's one that people just keep ignoring for whatever reason that has been a really good source for lead gen for you and your team?
So for me, the new role is the one. So that's when you follow and monitor target personas within your accounts and see and get alerted when they start a new role. So they've moved from VP of sales to chief revenue officer or to VP of sales in a different role, or it could be a sideways move or a promotion. It doesn't really matter. They've moved into a new position. And as I mentioned a little bit before, when moving into a new role, not only are you being usually tasked with, okay, it's your job to come in here in the first 90 days, we want you to do X, Y, Z. You also have a personal mission of proving the value that you have to offer. And most people there was a stat I once found it, and I've never been able to find it since, which spoke about, X% of people are likely to make a purchasing decision in the first 30 days of their new role or 60 days.
I've seen similar data. Yeah.
And there was something I saw, which I actually used in the video, was somebody was talking about Chili Piper. And they said, yep, I know Chili Piper. I've taken it with me to every company I've gone to. And now I'm on my third company. So there's the chance that people are moving. And there's also a really good tool out there at the moment. Again, the name is escaping me, but you put in your past customers and it tells you which of your past customers have started a new role. Because these are people that are familiar with your brand. Maybe they were on the buying committee or in the decision-making process. And because they're familiar with your brand, it might be a good opportunity to start the conversation with them. The name escapes me for now, but I can follow up for you with the name of that software. I'm not sure how expensive it is, but it's a pretty good time. Good time to have that conversation.
Yeah, that new role, I like that approach a lot because, like you said, it could be promotional, where I was a director of sales at one place, and then I moved to same size company, similar company, now I'm VP of sales or chief revenue officer. Mm-hmm. It could be perceived as lateral, but a different career challenge. So maybe as VP of sales for a $100 million company, now I'm taking over as VP of sales for an $8 million company that just raised a Series B.
Yeah.
And it's a totally different world. And if it's, we're talking about sales and marketing, that Series B company might not have the same tech stack that the $100 million company that just went IPO had.
And they're likely not to be able to afford the same tech stack either. They may have been on the best of breed Salesforce with a team of 10 developers working their Salesforce environment for them. Whereas now he's got Pipedrive, or she's gone and they've got HubSpot. So, it all depends, and there's so much nuance. But again, have the conversation. What's your biggest challenge in your new role? What's your focus? And that's a bit of a kind of forward question to ask on the first interaction. However, had you been playing the long game and you connect with them on social, and have some fun with your LinkedIn connections. One of my favorite ones is to ask who would win. As it would say, like, "Hi Scott, thanks for connecting. Just a quick question: who do you think would win out of a fight between an alligator and a koala bear?" That's all I ask, and then we have a conversation. And the responses I've got have been brilliant. Some people have time, some people don't. I wish I had more time to do it. But later on in months down the line, if that person becomes in my crosshairs because I think they could be TaskDrive could be of value to them, or we produce some content, I can reference the koala bear or the guy that said he'd pick the alligator because he always loves alligator shoes. And you pick up and you just build the rapport with these humans. At the end of the day, that's who you're connecting with.
Well, I think for context, people need to understand you have a bit of a dry sense of humor. So for you, that question makes sense because it's like who you are. But like you're listening to this podcast, you probably think like this guy Mark is like pretty straight laced, but they don't really know you, and they don't know that like that would be a question you would probably ask a complete stranger just for fun. So now there's going to be like a bunch of people on LinkedIn asking alligator versus koala question. It's going to be all your fault. The principle is right though. It's cutting through the noise and saying, look, let's ask a question that's completely outside of the business world, the sales world. Let's just show it's human to human. Let's get a connection. Let's get a conversation going. And just mostly make yourself memorable so that when that change does happen, whether it's a new hire or some intent data that pops up or whatever that is, that you've got something that you can reference to. And they're like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. He was the alligator koala guy. Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool, man. This has been a hoot. I know that there's, like we said, there's just this one post that we're referencing, the 14 lead sourcing playbooks for B2B companies. This is just one of lots of content, like on your site over at TaskDrive.com. I mean, you've got a post just recently about LinkedIn connection request, what you must change about it now. You've got a post about sales lead databases, because we talked a little bit about that, the difference between Zoom info and lead fuse versus what you do, database comparisons. So they're really, really tactical, really valuable content. So for everybody listening, you should absolutely go over to TaskDrive, check it out, and also, get yourself on their list because the content is fabulous. And I learned a lot just watching that one video and I've shared that link with several of our clients that are building out lists themselves because it's been that good. So awesome. Huge props to you for taking the effort, making the effort, and taking the time to push out this content and sharing it with people.
Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Look, as we're wrapping up, what's the best place for people to get a hold of you and learn more about the work that you're doing, whether it's at TaskDrive or Yellow O or any of the other, maybe people just want to hang out with you in Greece.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. We can smash some plates. We haven't done that since I've been in Greece. I'm hoping
drink some ouzo.
Drink some ouzo, smash some plates.
Smash some plates.
So to get in contact with me, the best place to find me is on LinkedIn, Mark Colgan, that's Colgan. I'm also hiring for a sales rep at TaskDrive. So if you are interested, and if I'm allowed to share this, might be a little bit too late, but I'd love to hear from you. Looking for a role, and it's completely remote. So please do get in touch.
Cool. Dude, this has been great. I'm so glad that we were able to get this together before the end of the year. Really love the conversation. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah, sometime soon. It's been really cool. Thanks, Scott. Cheers.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for the time, Mark. Talk to you soon.